Hello and welcome to Rotted Reviews, and today we open up the 16th door of our 2020 Advent Calendar of Christmas horror movies. This time, once again, taking a look at the show Into the Dark, the collaboration between Blumhouse and Hulu. This time, Season 2, Episode 3, A Nasty Piece of Work. Typically, I really don't review single-episode TV shows, but I made an exception with Season 2, Episode 2 of Pilgrim, and I'm going to do so here today because, well, frankly, we're talking about something that is never going to make it on broadcast TV. It's way too gruesome, gory, and just adult, and it's an hour and a half long, not including any kind of commercials. So it's essentially a movie, and I treat it thusly. So, A Nasty Piece of Work. Directed by Charles Hood, this was written by Paul Soter, who you might recognize as one of the writers, creators, and stars of many of the Broken Lizard movie features. And in this movie, we get introduced to the character of Ted, played by Kyle Howard, who is a man that is desperately trying to gain the favor or even the attention of his boss, played by Julian Sands. His boss is a very particular man, extraordinarily wealthy, just the tippy top of a big corporate entity, and that level of particularness really trickles down to how he treats his employees. If they get him the wrong golf clubs, then by God, they'll feel his wrath. And the Ted character finds himself in constant competition with his co-worker Gavin, played by Dustin Milligan, who you might recognize from Dirk Gently's Holistic Detective Agency, or more popularly, Schitt's Creek. And this competition starts to get a little bit fierce when everybody in the company is denied their Christmas bonus because of cutbacks and so forth. The company isn't doing quite well enough to warrant having bonuses across the table. But Ted and Gavin have been invited to a special supper at their boss's house, wherein each one brings their wives and seems to be an opportunity to fill a vacant position that was actually just created in terms of an executive management role. So this dinner starts to turn into a little bit of an interview and a little bit of a group competition, and things get out of hand. That's pretty much all I'll cover on a spoiler-free level. Suffice it to say, I did find this movie to be enjoyable enough. Honestly, when we're talking Christmas horror, this year has been a treat. I've already gone through 4 or 5 Krampus movies, not including the more popular one, and they are terrible. Not to mention Elves and Killer Santas and so forth. And so far, 2020, in regards to the Advent calendar, has been treating me not too terribly. So I was pleased to find that this one wasn't really, it wasn't all that, but it wasn't a kick in the nuts either. I think the problem with it is I found it enjoyable enough, but for a movie that really centers itself around surprising and shocking the audience, there was really nary an eyebrow raised to be found. And I think that the big component of that came down to the writing. Sorry, Paul Soter. But this is one of those things where it's just one of the core elements of it, because it comes down to something called escalation. It's incredibly important to develop proper escalation, because for an hour and a half long feature, it's difficult enough to maintain the audience's attentiveness, much less actual emotional interaction. People check out really quickly, and the problem with having a movie like this, where, not going to give any kind of spoilers, but with this interview getting out of hand, it really does something very, very extraordinarily big towards the beginning of this whole dinner experience, or at least about the halfway mark of the movie at the very least, as far as differentiating this between a polite dinner with maybe some adversarial interview questions and actually elevating it to the stakes of real surprises. This was one of the first tricks up its sleeve, and it was one of the biggest ones it had. And that, for me, really made the rest of it somewhat uninteresting. And that was a pretty big problem for me, because although I wouldn't say, honestly, that I wasn't surprised by some of the stuff that happened afterward, I just didn't really give a shit anymore. It really felt like it just expended all of its energy right at the onset, and the rest of it was just kind of so what. If this had taken some small steps of really twisting the Ted character around, really starting slowly with the tricks that they had up their sleeve until finally what they put out at the beginning may have been one of the things maybe at the 3/4 mark or towards even the end as a big climactic kind of surprise, I would have been more on board for it. Then it would have been something that had built up to it and shocked me, or at the very least, I would have been invested enough in the story to have cared about the surprise after that. As it was just kind of meh and entertaining enough to keep me interested in watching. As far as the positives of this, it had a very professional look and feel to it. The camera work, the editing, the sound design was all really top notch. Julian Sands playing the boss did a remarkably good job. I remember him mostly from the Stephen King miniseries Rose Red, but beyond that, really not terribly very familiar with his work, but I think he performed fairly well here. Dustin Milligan, if you've seen Dirk Gently's Holistic Detective Agency, he pretty much just kind of reprises that role here as the person that is very ambitious and really go-getter, but doesn't have a fucking clue what's going on around him and doesn't have the mental wherewithal to actually process the situation. So for me, it was, I guess it was an interesting enough kind of adversarial, almost antagonist, but not quite position that he found himself in, but it was also nothing really new. He plays the role, he plays it well. I think actually he plays it better than his role in Schitt's Creek. This guy knows what he's doing as far as playing the ambitious dunce. So would I recommend this movie? Sure. I mean, it's nothing that I would say absolutely go out and watch right this minute. Stop everything you're doing. Go buy a Hulu subscription now. But if you already have one, if you have an hour and a half to spare, yeah, why not go for it? There's nothing in me that wants to say nobody should watch this. There's nothing in me that wants to advise people away from it. This was a decent enough kind of thriller, kind of gory, kind of horror, kind of surprising, kind of Christmassy movie, and I kind of enjoyed it as a result. So there's my soft recommendation for this one. Take that for what you will. Thank you so much for joining me here today. I really look forward to seeing you tomorrow. Remember, next time you want to watch a horror movie, first make sure that it's good and rotted.